was a moonless night when Emily, an adventurer at heart, decided to explore the forest no one dared to enter. The locals always warned her about the cursed forest, a place where time stood still and shadows moved on their own. People who entered the forest were never quite the same, and some didn't return at all. But Emily, with her unshakable courage, ignored the warnings. As she stood at the forest's edge, the trees loomed like giants in the dark. The air was thick with silence, but then, almost like a distant whisper, she heard it. "Emily." The voice was soft but unmistakable, carried by the wind. Emily paused. Her heart skipped a beat, but she shrugged it off as her imagination. Stepping forward, she crossed into the forest, unaware of the strange and terrifying things that awaited her. The moment Emily stepped into the cursed forest, a heavy chill settled around her. The air seemed to grow thick, pressing against her chest. She adjusted the strap of her backpack, shaking off the eerie sensation, and continued forward. The trees around her towered high, their gnarled branches twisting in unnatural shapes. The forest was strangely quiet, as if holding its breath. Not a sound of birds or animals, just the rustling of leaves beneath her feet. She walked deeper, her flashlight cutting through the darkness. The further she went, the more she felt like the forest was closing in on her. The path ahead seemed to change, twisting and turning in ways that didn't make sense. Emily stopped, trying to make sense of the trail, but it was as though the trees themselves were shifting. Her heartbeat quickened as the whisper came again, louder this time, as though right behind her. "Emily." She spun around, but there was nothing there, only the heavy shadows of the trees. Emily's breath came faster now. She felt a growing unease, but curiosity pushed her forward. The deeper she walked, the more the whispers seemed to follow, getting louder with each step, until they weren't whispers at all. They were voices, faint but distinct, murmuring in a language she didn't understand. She tried to ignore them, but something in the air made her feel watched. She wasn't alone. Every crack of a twig underfoot made her jump. The shadows around her seemed to grow longer, more alive, stretching in ways that defied logic. Emily tried to focus on her flashlight beam, but it flickered erratically. The hairs on her neck stood on end as she heard it again. This time, it wasn't just the whisper of her name. "Leave." The voice was harsh now, a low, guttural growl that made her skin crawl. Emily froze in place, her heart hammering in her chest. A sudden gust of wind swept through the trees, but there was no breeze, only a sharp coldness that made her shiver. She felt as though the forest itself was reacting to her presence, angry that she had dared to step inside. The voice that warned her to leave still echoed in her mind as Emily's pulse quickened. She felt a pressure building in the air, a strange weight that pressed down on her chest. The forest, now silent again, felt like it was holding its breath, watching her every move. Emily gripped her flashlight tighter, her fingers trembling. She tried to reassure herself. "It's just the wind," she muttered. But deep down, she knew something wasn't right. The shadows around her seemed to move, creeping ever closer, as if they had a mind of their own. She turned and took a few steps forward, but the path before her had changed. The once familiar trail had vanished, replaced by a thick fog that had suddenly appeared, as if summoned by the forest itself. Her heart raced as she tried to push through it, but the fog was so dense she could barely see her own hands in front of her. Every step seemed to pull her deeper into the unknown. The whispers returned, but this time, they weren't just calling her name. They were speaking in a language, an ancient, guttural language, so soft and eerie that it sent shivers down her spine. The air grew colder still, and the shadows grew more distinct, taking on the shape of figures just beyond her vision. Her breath came in ragged gasps, panic starting to claw at her chest. The forest wasn't just alive, it was awake, aware of her presence, and it was angry. Suddenly, the flashlight flickered again, and Emily heard something behind her, a snap of a twig, the rustle of leaves, as if someone or something was following her. She spun around, her heart in her throat, but saw nothing. The trees stood still, their twisted branches swaying gently in the breeze. But the whispering, it was closer now, almost as if it was coming from the trees themselves. "Emily, come closer." Her breath hitched. The fog swirled around her, disorienting her, making it impossible to tell where she was going. She stepped backward, her mind racing. Where was she? How had she wandered so deep into the forest without realizing? Her surroundings were unfamiliar, distorted. It was as if the very fabric of reality was shifting, and the forest itself was pulling her into a different world, one where the rules didn't apply. The whispering was relentless now. But then, something strange happened. Amid the chaos of voices, one sounded different. A voice that wasn't urgent, wasn't desperate, but soft, calm. "Help me." Emily froze. The voice was clear, distinct, almost human. It didn't sound like the rest of the whispers. It sounded pleading. She glanced around frantically, her eyes searching through the fog for any sign of movement. The voice came again, softer but still clear. "Please, help me." It was coming from ahead. Emily didn't know why, but something about it tugged at her, making her take a hesitant step forward. The fog parted just enough for her to see a figure in the distance, faint but standing alone among the trees. The figure was tall, pale, with long, disheveled hair that glowed in the eerie light. It stood motionless, staring at her with dark eyes that seemed to pierce into her very soul. "Help me," the figure repeated. Emily's breath caught in her throat. The figure ahead remained still, but its eyes never left hers. The forest around her had gone eerily quiet again, almost as if it was waiting for something, waiting for her next move. The soft, pleading voice echoed in her mind, urging her closer. Every instinct screamed at her to turn around, to run, but curiosity, that ever-present companion, pushed her forward. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest as she took another cautious step toward the figure. But as she drew nearer, the figure's form began to flicker, its shape warping, twisting in and out of focus, like a mirage. Emily blinked rapidly, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. The figure seemed to dissolve into the fog, reappearing only a few feet away each time, getting closer, yet never quite within reach. The whispers returned, louder now, like a chorus of voices urging her on, urging her to follow the figure into the depths of the forest. "Help me." It wasn't just a voice anymore. It was a presence, a force that seemed to call out to her very soul. But with each step she took, the air around her grew colder. The trees closed in, their branches reaching out like twisted hands. The ground beneath her feet shifted, becoming softer, more treacherous. Emily's instincts screamed at her to stop, but she couldn't. It was as though an invisible pull was guiding her deeper into the forest. Then, suddenly, the figure stopped. Just ahead, it stood completely still, its back to her. Emily could see it more clearly now. Its pale, gaunt figure seemed to shimmer in the darkness, almost ghostly in the faint light. The air around it grew thick, oppressive, as if the very essence of the forest had gathered to form this being. The whispers ceased, replaced by a haunting silence that made the hairs on the back of Emily's neck stand up. Without warning, the figure turned slowly, its face now visible in the dim light. Emily gasped, her breath hitching in her throat. The face was almost human, but distorted, twisted in ways that no living being should look. The eyes were dark, hollow, empty, and yet they held a deep sorrow, a pain that seemed endless. It opened its mouth, but no sound came out. Instead, a cold gust of wind surged from its direction, knocking Emily back. She stumbled, her heart racing in panic. Something was terribly wrong. This figure wasn't asking for help. It was pulling her deeper into the curse of the forest. Her legs felt weak, her body trembling as the ground beneath her seemed to buckle. Like the forest itself was alive, shifting, reacting to her every move. The fog thickened again, and the whispers came crashing back. But now, they were different. Angrier, more intense, like a storm rising in the distance. Leave. Now. The warning was sharp and sudden, but it wasn't from the figure. It was the forest itself, the ancient spirit that had guarded it for centuries, and it was angry that she had come. Emily's flashlight flickered out completely. The path she had walked now disappeared into an endless sea of fog and shadows. She could feel the weight of the forest pressing against her, like the trees were reaching for her, trapping her in their ancient grasp. Emily's breath came in ragged gasps as the forest seemed to close in on her, its shadowy figures pressing closer. She felt trapped, her legs weak from the terror that had been creeping through her veins since the moment she had stepped into the forest. But then, something unexpected happened. The air, which had been so thick with unease, began to shift. The whispers grew softer, almost like a distant lullaby, their sharpness fading away. The figure ahead seemed to fade too. It wasn't gone, but its presence had softened, becoming less threatening, almost peaceful. The dark energy that had once surrounded her began to lift, replaced by a strange calm. The fog started to thin, the shadows retreating back into the trees. The forest, which had once felt alive with danger, now seemed almost serene, as if the curse itself was unraveling. Emily's heart, still pounding, started to slow as she realized she was no longer afraid. She was no longer running from the forest's dark embrace. She had been invited to understand it. Slowly, she walked forward, the path now clear in front of her. The trees stood tall and silent, their gnarled branches swaying gently in the breeze, their twisted forms now seeming beautiful, even protective. She could feel the shift in the air, like the forest itself was offering a kind of apology, as though it had been misunderstood. The figure, no longer a shadow of horror, stood by her side, its sorrowful gaze meeting hers. Emily realized then that it wasn't a threat. It was a lost soul, trapped within the curse of the forest, and it wasn't asking for help. It was asking to be understood. The whispers that had once terrified her now sounded like a melody, a song of longing. The forest wasn't a place of death and fear. It was a place of memory, of history, and of deep sorrow. Emily understood now that the forest had no intention of hurting her. It had merely been protecting itself from those who didn't understand its grief. As the first rays of dawn broke through the trees, casting a soft golden light across the forest floor, Emily took a deep breath. The curse had not broken, but it had been transformed. And as she turned to leave, she knew she was not the same. The forest had shared its secret with her, and in return, she had learned to listen, to understand, and to let go of her fear. Emily stepped out of the forest, the sunlight warming her face, and the path ahead clearer than ever. The whispers faded into the distance, leaving only the peaceful hum of nature in their place. What do you think Emily truly learned from her time in the cursed forest? Do you believe the forest was a place of danger or healing? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and click the bell icon to stay updated with more sleep stories. Share this story with your friends if you think they would enjoy it, and let me know if you want more mysterious tales like this one.